Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Today, I have Jason Calva with me. He's a fellow practitioner of acupuncture, and so we're gonna talk about we're gonna talk a little bit about his origins and how he got into pranic healing and also Chinese medicine, and kind of go from there. So, brief introduction of Jason Calva. So, Jason Calva is a doctor of acupuncture and a certified pranic healing instructor. Jason has been practicing and teaching pranic healing for over 15 years. After being introduced to teachings, he studied under Master Stephen Ko, author of Your Hands Can Heal You, and was trained to become a certified healer and instructor. Over the last decade, Jason has taught in the US, China, and helped open the first pranic healing center in Mongolia. As a practitioner, Jason blends pranic healing into his acupuncture practice. His PhD thesis was about the synthesis of these two modalities as he researched pranic healing in a hospital setting in Tianjin, China. Being formally trained in the West and the East, Jason understands how meditation and Eastern philosophy may be used to improve our Western lifestyles, as well as how to incorporate practical spirituality into our daily lives, without losing the deeper essence of the teachings. For this first conversation, we're going to talk about the hidden dangers and the pitfalls of the meditation practice, both from a practical side like pride and ego inflation, but also why it can open Pandora's box. So, okay, so let's go from there. So first, thank you, Jason, for doing this. Thank you. It's
Yeah, brother. Thanks
it's always
for having me, man. I appreciate
yeah.
it.
This is great because this is something that I've been, I think we do kind of similar work. We use our, energy medicine to kind of combine with our acupuncture practice. And I think that there's really quite a bit of subtlety, and there's quite a bit of balance to that. So because acupuncture is such a subtle art. And so to have the energetics component really, I don't know, gives you more of a more
Nuanced
under yeah.
approach or balanced, perspective of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because going to acupuncture school, when I was doing palpation for points in school, I realized as I started touching and palpating, I can see the lines, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is real. And then started to my experience of the palpation and then studying the theory, it just made sense. Now, I didn't see all those lines and all the details, but I
Mhm.
saw and felt the meridians, so that was very interesting.
Especially because in acupuncture school, they tell us, chi is an invisible life force. You can't feel it or see it, and those of us who can sense or feel it or even see it, then you're like, no, I can feel the chi in the hands, or I can feel those things. So it becomes more than just like a theoretical construct, where it actually is like a tangible thing that you work
Hmm.
with. And so I think that's one thing that's definitely missing in most like acupuncture schools too. So
Hmm. Yeah, we're talking about, basically it's like the magnetic force that you're feeling from the magnet. You can see the magnet, you may touch the magnet, but you can't quite feel the magnetic um, force from the magnet. And I think that having the ability to sense that, we can start to create change. But
yeah,
all
and
right,
that's
but
where
anyway.
you and I kind of bonded over that, and as well as the topic today, just because a lot of those things that the way that it's taught in the West, we almost throw out the baby with the bathwater, where it's like chi isn't real. We don't want to think of acupuncture as like a spiritual thing. It's very medical based and things like that. But then you lose part of that intuitive kind of feeling with it. And then everywhere meditation is like, oh, it's great. Everyone should meditate. And we were kind of how this topic came up because you and I were chatting about like, well, no, it opens up doors, and for certain people, maybe it's not that great, or they should be aware of different things, or have a qualified teacher. And so there's great benefits to meditation. You and I are both pretty diehard meditation practitioners, but that also comes with everything. There's risk, even as innocuous as meditation. So I think that's where you and I just really kind of hit it off, was this whole topic in a
Yeah,
nutshell.
yeah. So let's start with some other questions, and we'll come back to that topic because that's so. Let's go with so just so everybody kind of gets to know you a little bit better. So, what's the main event in your life that made you seek a spiritual path?
Yeah, well, I think like so many of us who are spiritual seekers at a younger age, um, something usually happens that kicks us off of the normal physical plane reality, where you're kind of shaken up a little bit. And for me, the two big ones were death. Was my mom passed of brain cancer when I was 13, and that forced me to kind of initial impetus jarred me for like my concept of religion and God and things like that. I grew up in a very traditional kind of a Christian background, and so when my mom would always say things like "It's okay, God's going to heal me, Jesus is going to heal me," and all of these things, as she was slowly kind of declining, I started having more like anger towards God. It wasn't like I don't believe in you; it's like I'm pissed at you, kind of a thing. Because I mean, you're 13, you're already in those rebellious years. But I was actually with my mom when she transitioned, and that was the first time that I had an out of body experience. And this kind of changed, or for me, it was what opened the door to realizing that there's something beyond just our physical world, and that there's a spiritual world all around us. And so I remember basically I had my hands on like my mom's feet while she was in the bed. It was hospice care at home, and as soon as they had said that she had passed, I felt like everyone around me started crying, and I just had this blank feeling. And I heard this. It was a female voice, so it didn't feel like my own inner voice. I heard this woman's voice say, "It's okay, Jason. You're in shock." And before I could even process that, it was like I was looking at like the back of my head and slowly kind of drifting up out of my body, almost like I was upside down. And so by the time I'm getting to like the ceiling, I could look around, I could see where like my mom's body was, where I was sitting, my family all around me. And while I was out of my body, I just had this sense or feeling of this presence all around me. And I didn't see angels, I didn't see God, I just felt that presence, and this comforting kind of a feeling all around me. And so as I started to kind of drift higher, all of a sudden it was like I stopped and slowly started kind of coming back down into my body. And as soon as I was seeing through like my physical eyes again, I felt this hand just kind of like press on my shoulder and anchor me into my body. And that was when like all the emotions just kind of flooded through. And I just started crying, and I thought it was my dad's hand on me. And so I turned to hug my dad, but he was just to the other side of me holding my sister. And so it took me years to kind of grasp like what was going on during that. Was I like
Yeah,
leaving my body, and it was like an angel or a healing guide or a spiritual teacher on the other side just kind of was like, no, 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 not your time, anchored me back in my body. And so I had to all of a sudden, it took years to kind of reconfigure like what you're told about religion and God and spirituality. And then all of a sudden I had this direct experience that didn't necessarily fit right in the framework of what I was brought up with. And so that is what made me start to question everything. And so even as a teenager, I started reading a lot of books on spirituality, Hinduism, Buddhism, meditation, psychic phenomena, kind of everything, until I started to find more in alignment with Buddhism, particularly Tibetan Buddhism was what I really felt at home with when I started reading a lot about it. Um, and then I was still kind of dabbling though, because you're a teenager, right? And then when I was 20, my best friend took his own life. And that was really the dark night of the soul that kind of propelled me into spirituality into a way that was not just like a superficial level. I was desperately seeking kind of like inner healing, inner peace. I was just so distraught with grief and anger, that it really took a while to kind of find a practice and get into it. And that was how I got into pranic healing, to kind of segue into that. Um, at the time, um, this kind of segues into this topic of why it was important to me. was I had already been dabbling in spirituality, but I was self-medicating with way too much cannabis, not using it as a plant medicine, as a sacred medicine. I was fully abusing it and trying to just kind of drown out everything. But because I was so angry and depressed and I wasn't working on processing those emotions, it was like trauma can actually open or release or rupture your energy body in certain ways. So the chakras or the energy centers I had blown open, and then I started using cannabis that kind of makes things more pliable anyway. And so at the time, I just started having a few months around that time, I was having waking paralysis where I'd wake up in the middle of the night, or I think I would, and it was like feeling like someone was sitting on my chest or like things were attacking me. I'd start to see all sorts of dark, scary kinds of experiences with spirituality. It wasn't like bright, happy kind of a thing. But I knew that that was real because of my experiences in the past. I was just like, where is it? And so when I met someone who did pranic healing, they were also like a mystic. They were clairvoyant. They could see energy and things like that. And I just said, why is it all I'm seeing is dark, scary stuff? And so they said, well, you had this emotional trauma that brought your energy down. And so you're kind of sitting in your lower emotions or the lower energy body. And then when you rupture that with trauma, everything that you're seeing, you're perceiving the spiritual world from like your lower emotions. So they said you need to work on bringing more love and compassion and things like that into your life. And so you should start learning a meditation called Meditation on Twin Hearts, which activates your heart chakra, your crown chakra, and just allows divine energy to kind of flow through you to kind of purify your channels. And they said over time, you'll start cleaning the energy body. So a lot of the things you see, and also the chakras can sort of like seal themselves or heal with using divine energy, so that what I perceive won't be the dark, scary stuff anymore. I can start bringing my consciousness higher, raising my vibration higher. So when I see things, it's not lower, creepy stuff. It is that inspirational kind of a thing. And they said you need to quit using cannabis for now, just because it's muddying everything. You need to just clear everything out, let it be your own consciousness, learn meditation. And as soon as I started doing that meditation, I remember the first time I did it, that I felt just quieter and more still. And so I was like, all right, I'm just going to do this meditation every day. And so then I started buying all the books on pranic healing. I started looking for classes and jumped into it that way for my own self healing. And as it started to change for me, that was when I was like, no, I'd love to help out other people who are struggling with whether it's physical pain or emotional pain or things like that, to kind of bring them into more of a spiritual practice. And so that was how I got into pranic healing, was just trying to heal trauma, trying to make it so that I could get out of the pitfalls of some of that spiritual practices that were bringing me into a scary place, because I didn't have a teacher, I didn't have a guide or a mentor really. And so when I came into pranic healing, that was the first time, meeting my mentor Chandan and also meeting Master Stephen Coe was the first time I felt like, okay, I have qualified teachers to guide me kind of along the way on what I should be doing kind of moving forward. And so since I've experienced the scary part of spirituality as well as like the beautiful part of spirituality, I know that they're both there and they both exist. And so that's where anytime someone's new to meditation, I'm always like, okay, make hay slowly. Let's talk about some things. What are some things you should be prepared for? So that's really how I came into all of this. So
No, that's great. Because that's so the thing is, like, Jason and I, we shared the same similar stories. I also had that sleep paralysis and as a kid, and um it happened around, I want to say around age 13, 14. Basically started when I started learning martial arts and Qigong and going kind of in pretty deep with it. And as you know, as like teenagers, we were doing meditation. We were doing, me and my cousins, we were all learning meditation and martial arts together. So we were doing meditation, we were sitting doing meditation, and there's a certain point in your practice where you start to feel and sense and see other dimensions or other realms of reality. And this is the thing with spirituality that a lot of folks are. I feel that a lot of folks are not really necessarily talking about. And it's not to scare people. It just is what it is. Um,
So if it
and
happens
then,
to them, they know that, they're not,
mhm,
you know, not that it's hard because like when you and I have talked about like schizophrenia or things like that, a lot of times those things when someone has psychological, we call them disorders in the West, but sometimes it could be due to different things that are also happening spiritually. And so
mhm,
that doesn't mean that they shouldn't take medications or things like that. But like if you understand some of the energetic or the spiritual component, because in your tradition, it's like Qigong psychosis, or in the yogic tradition, I was taught was like, watch out for Kundalini syndrome, or like when you start doing some kind of a meditation, you start moving the energy in the body, that's going to awaken things. And if you're not prepared for it, it can cause all sorts of crazy stuff.
mhm. It unleashes darker, more negative energies that are within the energetic body, within the physical body, within the energetic body. That the stuff that you inherited, whether it's be from this physical lifetime, from their ancestors, or it can also it can also activate karmic things, which are from previous lives and whatnot. So whether if you believe in that or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's lower frequencies, then you will attract these other, we can say, forces um, that will stimulate that. And also they don't serve, um, well, they do serve a purpose, but it doesn't feel like it's serving you. And so I think that, yeah, so for me, I had a year and a half where I had sleep paralysis. And in the Hmong culture, my parents, they were freaking out because they brought in shamans from all, every shaman that they knew in to come and do ceremonies for me, and nothing got them to go away. And in the Hmong culture, when we have sleep paralysis and something comes in the room and sits on you, this is what they'd say it as. It's a being.
Mm-hmm.
We sleep with the pillow, with a knife under the pillow, and I didn't do anything for me. Every nap that I took didn't do anything. So one day, I guess it just stopped. But something within us happens when we are on this path, and I think some of us are thrusted onto this path because of our life circumstances, like yourself and myself, right? Some of us are choosing to go on this path, and then we're doing these practices, and then something opens up, and then this happens. So and there are many other variables that could kind of contribute to this process. So, but anyway, let's get moving. We could talk all day. So
Well,
what?
yeah, and I think that's one of the things is that, like I had a friend who got involved in pranic healing because he was a musician and he just went to YouTube and was just like, oh, what's a calming exercise to do? And he found some of all the things. It was like a yogic breathing where you would just block one nostril, and they would call it like it's either sun breathing or moon breathing, depending on which channel you're opening up. And so he's like, oh, I want to be energized. I want to open up my sun channel. So the Ida and the Pingala channels. So these are in yoga. When you look at like the medical staff, how it's usually a bar and it has two snakes coiled up around it. At the top,
Mhm.
it's got like the wings kind of coming off of it. So that's the caduceus or the caduceus. When you do different breathing exercises, it opens up those snakes or the Ida and the Pingala channels in the body to help awaken Kundalini. And so there's different physical exercises you do, like in hatha yoga to kind of warm up the body, and then you do breathing to move the energy. Well, my friend didn't do any of those things. It was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna just inhale forcefully, exhale through the right nostril, and all of a sudden they started to feel like out of it, where he said, I remember all of a sudden like I sat down to try and play music and everything felt really hard. I felt really sluggish and slow. I couldn't get into a certain rhythm. And his friend, when he called him, was like, I don't know if I can play tonight. I'm having all this stuff because I watched this video and I did this breathing exercise. Everything is off. And they said, oh, a friend of mine does pranic healing and there happens to be like a free healing clinic tonight. And so that was my teacher, Chandan. They're like, oh, he's from India. He's a yogi. He'll know what to do to fix you. So as soon as the guy sits down and Chandan starts to feel this person's energy body, instead of it feeling like balanced, it was like all the energy was lumped to one side because they were just breathing through one nostril. So all of a sudden this energy shifts over. And so all we had to do was, sweep the person's aura to kind of get everything balanced and redistribute the energy. And that was what made them want to learn like pranic healing and energy techniques. But it was because their spiritual path or how they got in was because they just opened YouTube, started practicing something, and it gave them a negative side effect that they weren't planning for. And so that
Mhm.
was one of the things where I'm like, yeah, no, this, how many people are out there that are doing spiritual practices that they don't have someone to guide them through the
Yep.
steps. So
Yep. That's for me, that's one of the biggest concerns that I'm having right now, because I'm just, with all the stuff that's being posted on YouTube, and some of these YouTubers, they got like millions of followers, and they're teaching some things that I'm just kind of like, oh my gosh, you're it's informative, but if people really but if people practice, some of these people are going to awaken things. And so with them, then they may not be so good. And also there isn't the conversation as far as to the conversation that we're having right here, right now,
mm,
which is that if this happens, you know, you should see somebody who's more qualified. And if it is something that, and again, it's not to spook people. It's just education. It's just to inform people, like, hey, this is what comes with this practice. These
yeah,
practices. If you're going to do these practices, find somebody who is qualified. Um, and from my experience, what I'm beginning to recognize is that there are um, within within every one of us, and this is all based on my own interpretation. And you can feel free to chime in
hmm
anytime you'd like, Jason. What I'm noticing is that from my own practice, and also the students along the years who've been coming in, and I've been teaching, and also some of my acupuncture patients as well, um, is that within every one of us we have a community of identities. And so a community of identities, it can be a particular age, it could be 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever the case may be, or it can also be this one time where you got bullied, or this one time where you got left alone, or this one time where you got lost in the park, or whatever, right? And the cops had to come and find your parents, or whatever, right? Or it can be any other traumatic event. There are these particular identities or belief systems that we have within us that sort of made us who we are, that shaped us, both positively and also negatively. And some of them are very traumatic and are negative. And so when you do these practices, you access this state of consciousness, the state of higher consciousness, or the state of bliss. And so you access this higher state. And then you also, because your soul is also ready for it as well, because so sometimes it's not an accident, but you also access these lower frequency states, or these more traumatic states, or memories that are trapped within the body, which allows these things to come to the surface, which are imbalances. And so so it's important. And so my experience with it is that it's important to have some to explain that it's not all bliss and unicorns and rainbows, because it's not. It's
yeah.
work. Yeah, it's work. It's both light and dark. But go ahead.
Oh yeah.
Anything
So,
to,
so that's why. So my teacher, the founder of pranic healing, so Master Choa Koksui, always has us do "I am the soul" affirmation. And so one of the ways that you do that is you first deny what you are. So we say, I am not this body, meaning I'm not all of the experiences. I'm not a man. I'm not a woman. I'm not my gender. I'm not my ethnicity. I'm not my age. I'm the soul, right? I'm not my feelings. I'm not my thoughts. I'm not my mind. Those are all things that the soul uses to feel, to express itself, to kind of move in the physical world. But when you're new, we're over identified with all of those things, where you're identified with, again, like how old you are. Everyone's like, what's your name? You identify with your name, your family name. You identify with your gender or non-binary, or all of those things. We're over fixated with who we are as a physical being, right? And so it's like you have to let a lot of those things go, because it's like when you talk about past lives and reincarnation, it's like you're that being of light that moves from body to body, from culture to religion to different ethnicities, genders. And so all
mhm.
of those things, so you are the soul that experiences all of those different aspects of having physical life. And so the more you can affirm, like, no, I am actually the soul, I am that, I am that I am, that's when it starts to kind of change but you still have to go through a purification process. And so the way that I always kind of explained it was, like, and this is why in ancient times they would always use like farming language or like agriculture, like what you sow, you reap, and things like that. Was that if your chakras have different seeds or tendencies inside of them, and so when your chakras are small, you don't notice. Like I just have a small tinge of, say, like anger, and so you're like, no, I'm a calm, happy person all the time. But if you do a meditation that brings more of that energy in, and it makes that energy center go, what? Now that little bit of anger, it is a little bit bigger of a trigger. And so all of a sudden you'll find yourself being like, I'm supposed to be meditating and feeling inner peace, but I'm feeling irritable all the time, or I'm feeling frustrated all the time. And so it could be wherever the divine energy is that flows down. So again, back to the caduceus. So it's like you have that bar in the middle is supposed to be what's called the sushumna, or your spiritual spine. And so as divine energy kind of comes down and awakens kundalini energy at the base of the spine, kundalini and divine energy, when they hit the chakras or the energy centers, they act like fertilizer, right? So whatever is inside of your chakras gets magnified. So in the beginning, it's like, okay, here's all this stuff I need to work on. I need to work on being more calm and more loving, or I need to work on being more patient, more generous. And so it's not, it's going to happen with every spiritual tradition. When you open up the spiritual floodgates, stuff comes down, and it's not just the good things, the everything gets amplified, right? And so that's where we have to work on purification, and why that's so important. Again, when the chakras go from being little to being larger, but then when they go to being super huge, that's when you can fall spiritually, or fall from pride, or have ego, and all of those kinds of things kind of kick in, when actually you're trying to get rid of a lot of those things, right? And so all of the energy centers have positive and negative kind of, and I don't mean to say negative, they just have different energies that they utilize, and so it's like the base of the spine, or your root chakra, your basic chakra, we would say, is sense of survival, right? So when that's strong, you have a good, healthy self-interest, healthy self-boundaries, survival instinct. But if it becomes too dirty, if that energy center is not clean, that sense of survival can then become greed, when you're no longer just trying to survive for yourself, it's trying to survive at the expense of other people. And similarly, so then like the sex center, instead of like sexuality is good, sex is fantastic, it's used to have union with other people. That's how new souls take in bodies, is from sex. But if all of a sudden the sex energy becomes over amplified, then all of a sudden you can have a super high sex drive, and it feels uncontrollable, or things like that. And if you've grown up in a very puritanical background, you'll feel like, oh no, sex is evil, the devil is tempting me, what's going on? And it's not even those things, it's just a natural process of the energy is getting bigger and stronger. So now you have to learn how to navigate. What does it feel like to have a strong, healthy sex drive? Let that energy move through the body. Don't just suppress energy. And for most of us, though, a lot of it is the emotional stuff, because we have so much stress. So our emotional centers, when you start to amplify that, it's like all those little stressors, irritability, everything gets amplified, and then you feel more emotional. And so if you're not doing physical exercise to help flush things out, as well as doing different meditative practices to make sure you're more calm and loving, to try and offset some of those things, that's really where you start getting into trouble, because you're throwing fertilizer all over everything, but you're not taking the time to weed out all of the things that can kill your crop, which is your spiritual development. And so I think that's really when people get into things, they do it almost as spiritual escapism, where they don't want to do the inner work. They don't want to say, oh God, this traumatic event happened in my life, and now I need to consciously work on processing it and how that is integrated into my body, my energy body, so that it doesn't negatively impact me anymore. And most people are like, nope, I just want to focus on the bright spiritual shiny things, the unicorns and all of that, not do the inner work of purifying, our irritability, our lower nature. And so that is, for me, one of the biggest things in modern times. Anyone can download a meditation app and start practicing things, but if they don't know that these things are inevitably going to rise to the surface of their consciousness, because my teacher called it principle of displacement. So it's like if your energy body is like a jar of oil, right? And so that's all the lower, heavier emotions, lower energies, and then divine energy or spiritual energy of your higher self, of the higher beings, God, things like that is like water. And those two things don't mix. So when you start pouring that energy into your body, what happens is all of the oils and all the heavier stuff comes to the surface and starts flowing out. And you have to just be almost patient while this stuff keeps coming out, out until you feel like, okay, now I feel relatively clean. And you feel that way for a while, then all of a sudden it's like a new thing opens up, boom, because you have even more energy. And you're like, man, I thought I healed
Yep.
this, or I worked out this, and I'm still becoming irritable or grumpy or whatever it is again. And I have to reprocess childhood trauma or things like that again and again, because you're getting at deeper layers of things. And every time you clear out the heavier stuff, the chakras expand even fuller, more divine energy comes in, and you grow and evolve through that process. And it's when someone's new, I can always tell if someone's a veteran practitioner, like how same way where I connected with you is if someone is just like, oh, I feel great all the time, and they haven't hit those pitfalls. I'm just like, okay, give it 6 months, give it a year, give it 2 years, but inevitably something will happen where everything gets brought to the surface, and you have to start working on it before you can go above and beyond that to like a higher state.
Yep. Or I'm like, oh, or you're lying to yourself and everybody else.
Right? And all of us do, and we're all human, and that's part of the fun of it and the play. But it's, these things, I think it's similar with psychedelics, and that's where you've talked about that before, and I've listened to your YouTube channel, that when sometimes the people take psychedelics willy-nilly, without a guide, without purification, without being prepared to handle, like, well, this is going to bring stuff up. And if it is something that's brought up that's scary, like, don't hide it, don't suppress it. You're just going to make it worse. You need to lean into it and let it teach you. And it's the exact same in meditation practices.
Yep. That's what I'm finding too. I'm finding that a lot of it is the spiritual path is a spiritual path. It depends on the tool that you're using. And at the end of it is really about personal development, spiritual development, character development, and really learning about how, like I said, all these identities within you. Like, so for example, for myself, I got bullied a lot, and I got jumped. I grew up in the hood and got jumped and got picked on all the time. I was easy pickings. And so I learned martial arts to defend myself. And when I learned it for straight revenge and for anger. And that anger was what drove me to get to the place where I got good at it. But now it no longer serves me. And so now it's just angry. And also there's also a bunch of other stuff that came with that too. And so it's like trying to get rid of that. So now it's like I'm working through these knee-jerk reactions, like I'm finding that my thoughts are in such a particular way, like my thoughts would say this, and like, ooh, no. And then so I'm finding myself to retract, because the old me that served me, that got me to a certain place, now as a healer, it's not something that I necessarily need anymore. But I should have it in the back burner, but I just shouldn't need it anymore. So it's just a constant self-observation of who inside is talking, and learning how to retract, and pull back and learn, oh, wow, this particular aspect of my life or component of myself served me during this time and it got me here. But at this stage, I'm a healer. Healer no longer needs this very violent, raging fire force, right? This healer, which is why my buddy gave me the tanga and told me to start practicing the Om Mani Padme Hum to practice compassion, because like, Peng, your warrior energy is too intense. You gotta be a better healer. Better healer needs more heart. A healer needs a bigger heart. And so it's funny because I was doing Muay Thai at that time. I was training. I was on the fight team and I was training like 6 days a week. And these are like, I'm training with killers. And so I started practicing. I had my beats. I was doing the the Om Mani Padme Hum chant. And I was just doing it for about 2 weeks. And I was sparring with my, straight killers. And I found myself hesitating and hesitating and hesitating. And I was just way nice. And so, but I was getting my butt kicked. And so,
Right. So it
and so
doesn't
I said,
always serve in that where you're like, all right, no, I need to.
yeah, yeah. So I told him, hey man, this is making me too nice. I need to, we both had a chuckle. I was like, it's making me too nice in Muay Thai. So I put a pause on it, but I'm jumping back on it. So, but you can see that, these practices, that the things that we practice, whether it be, yeah, for martial arts, or a particular martial art, particular energy practices, the things we're thinking, the books we're reading, is really like beginning to hone and shape you as an individual. And so doing the best I can to purify my thoughts, and to purify my the energetic realms of what I'm letting influence my being. It's quite an undertaking. So
Well, kind of like
go ahead.
when we talk about um, some of the things with when it comes to like your consciousness. I mean, it's you want to ride the elevator of consciousness. So like when you need to do spiritual things, you know how to get up there and have that. Then all of a sudden you need to come back down and have like normal human relationships and be grounded, right? Like when do I focus on business? Even if you're training for martial arts and things like that, it's like on the one end you might have been using anger and kind of like this defensive, but at the same time, like how can you embody being a warrior in a sense where it's like I can still be someone who can stick up for the right things and to protect people in a way that's healthy, and not out of trying to show off or not trying to hurt somebody, but out of that like very compassionate kind of a way. Like sometimes you might have to hurt somebody else out of compassion for a group of people, right? If someone shows up with a knife and they're going to start stabbing people, you have to know like how would I defend myself? How would I have to use violence actually as a form of love and preservation for the family or the people that are around me? Not because I want to hurt somebody, not because I'm driven to, but because it's like my duty to do it as like as a soldier, as a warrior. And that is very different than when someone's like, I want to just learn how to fight so I can kick someone's ass if they mess with me, right? And so I think that as you grow and shift, you start to realize all the mature aspects of all of the different kind of ways that we relate to life and practice. So, and that's where it's hard is I think that restructuring. So it's like a few things is one of the biggest things if I can explain to people is to not take your thoughts seriously, because thoughts are just energies floating in your system. And as you awaken different energy centers, your thoughts or your feelings kind of change sometimes. You're like, why am I thinking about that? Like that, why would I think about being violent and like breaking someone's face or something? And sometimes you're just like, oh, that might have been an old part of myself. Like that's how I would have thought. Okay, so then how would I move that into a compassionate kind of way of approaching things? Or when you really mean mentally or emotionally, and you're like, geez, I was just being a jerk right there in my mind to someone. I didn't say it out loud, but I'm almost embarrassed that I thought it. And just being like, just because you thought it doesn't mean that's you. It just means there's energies or there's things that are coming up, and just be like, oh no, that's weird. And then sometimes we'll tell you like, oh, I don't believe in that, or that person that I was thinking really critically about, like, okay, how would I have more compassion for them? And looking at it from a different perspective. And so it's just always whatever kind of comes up is trying to be like, well, what could this teach me? What can I learn from this? And not wholly identifying with your thoughts as who you are, because sometimes weird things come up and it's just like, oh, no. And you don't have to reject it. It's just like, oh, that was interesting, and not identifying with it as who you are, right? Because you are not your thoughts or your emotions. Those are things that you experience. And I think a lot of people over-identify, I think, therefore I am, where really, I am, therefore I think,
Yeah, and they punish themselves for it.
Yeah, and then you feel horrible, you think you're a bad person, and that's not the case. It's just...
Yeah, we if we get a little bit more deeper into it, they're like, we are influenced by the thoughts of others, meaning first of all, our families, our father or mother,
Mm-hmm.
our living situation, whatever that situation may be, and also that information that was passed down um, to you from your parents,
Oh yeah.
um, because there's that all that
Generations, generations.
yeah,
No.
generations upon generations of information. And so it's like when I tell people like, look, your nose and your eyes, it doesn't really belong to you. It belongs to the ancestors that gave it to you. And also your personality traits, some of them, the good ones and the bad ones, everything that makes you you, you inherited those things too. And so the idea is, well, how do I bring my best self forward? And how can I take that? How can I take the very most positive aspects of the things that I inherited from my ancestry, and how can I observe the things that are not so good? Um, Alcoholism, suicide, depression, anxiety, cancers, right? We inherit these things, and I I joke about it, and I say like, yeah, like certain dogs, we breed certain dogs to do certain things. This
Mm-hmm.
particular dog does that. This particular dog does that, right?
Yep.
And well, we're kind of the same thing. We have certain traumas, we have certain characteristics, and that are inherited from our ancestry as well. And so, as long as we take time to recognize, like, oh wow, yeah, this is my ancestry. These are the behaviors that I inherited, and so now I need to understand. Okay, so this serves me. So the two that I can always bring up is that they're always on opposite ends. There's a person who is a human doing, and then there's human being. The human doing person is type A, go 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 go. They can't stop. They can't stop no matter. And it's great. These people are highly successful. They get stuff done. And then there's human being, which is more like me. I'm fully present, but it's hard to find motivation. Fully present, nothing bothers. Fully present, always living with the flow, but then doesn't get stuff done. So the idea is that you have one who's burning themselves out, one who is too much of a sloth, and so
Mm-hmm.
the idea is to try to find and do the balance. And so once we can, because both of these will lead to health issues as well. Um, and also it's an imbalance. The universe has these polar these opposites that you. So understanding which one you are and how you need to be to swing to create that balance.
Mm-hmm.
Because this person was burning the candle at the both ends, they're killing themselves. This
Yeah.
person and this person over here is not getting a lot of stuff done. So the idea is to kind of get this
They're
to
killing
balance
themselves
out.
with like inactivity, right? Instead of
Exactly,
overactivity, right?
exactly, and killing dreams.
Mm-hmm.
So but it's this, so it's this component. So it's a strength and a strength, also a weakness and also a weakness. Both has light, both have dark. One isn't better than the other. Both have light and dark. Just kind of wanted to, but
Yeah, and just knowing when to be one or the other, you know. Uh,
mm-hmm.
I giggled because I was like, oh, then you need to hang out with Master Co more, because that's a lot of what he teaches, like how to, they explain like, meditation is like inhaling. It's like taking in energy of God or the divine or of your higher self, and expands your energy centers, your aura. But then you still need to be out in the world doing service, um, you have to make money. You have to do all of these things. So it's like you have to then let the energy come in and then move out into the world too. And so it's if someone is go go go, they're exhaling all the time. They don't have time to recharge. If someone's inhaling all the time, that can also be a danger of meditation where they're becoming over congested and they don't know how to ground it and become practical. And so it's always trying to, again, go back and forth between when do I engage with the world and let that energy flow through, and when do I need to retreat and kind of recharge and restore a lot of my own energy. And so that's always, I think, tricky for those of us living in modern times, because everything is grasping for our attention all the time to distract us from both being productive or being, more in the recharge and meditative state. I mean, our phones are literally just like trying to,
Oh
get
yeah,
our attention to do other things all the time. So
Yeah.
Those are like some of the fetters to the path. Um,
Yeah.
and it's like when we were talking about like practical, and I don't mean to say danger meditation, but one of the, it goes both ways. It's that one of the things that starts to change is your circle of friends or your family. You know, initially we have friends because of, you know, sports you're involved with or different things, and as you grow up, you start to realize as you grow and change, it almost creates like an existential crisis of being like, well, who am I? You know, if I'm not all of these things, right? And so that can lead you into finding out who you really are as a spiritual being. But in before you've kind of come to that conclusion or feel that, it's kind of like this, I don't know who I am or what I actually believe in outside of what's been told to me. And
Oh yeah.
then who are the people I want to be surrounded with? And so your life kind of gets turned upside down for a while. And you have to be okay with that, because once things get turned upside down and some of the people that aren't supposed to be in your lives kind of start moving to the out, from being close friends to being like good acquaintances, that makes room for some of those, we call it your sangha or your spiritual community or like your chosen family, like to make room for those kinds of connections and people, because that's how you find them, is by finding out who you really are. And then as you know yourself as a spiritual being, then it's easier to relate to other people in that way. You find other people who are also on similar paths of self-development, who support themselves, but also like encourage you to become a better person and encourage all of your dreams to come true. Whereas I think sometimes your friends are kind of the ones that rag on you or actually slow your life down, either from a practical
Hmm.
sense or a spiritual sense, because they're so busy wanting you to be who you are and not wanting you to grow outside of who they know. And so even your friends, your family can be a source of like what weighs you down.
Hmm.
Um, and
Yeah.
so until you start to make changes and you're comfortable with that, you kind of like disengage and then re-engage. And a lot of times people that I never thought would become yogis or meditation practitioners, after they see you change and they're like, I don't know what you're doing, but I want to be part of that. I want to learn more of that. It's always crazy who kind of comes back into the fold, even though they were out for a couple years. So if you would have talked to me at 26, you'd be like, oh, I miss, you know, my friends I grew up with. And then once you start being into your 30s or 40s, they start coming back around like, all right, all that weird spiritual stuff you do, like, what is that and how can I learn some of it? Because you seem to navigate life a little bit differently now than you did before you understood those things. So
Hmm.
it's always
Hmm.
knowing that with everything that happens that can be like a negative connotation or something that's sad, there's always the benefit to it, you know?
Hmm.
And especially when you in the when we were talking earlier, like when you start opening up, you're just aware of everything, right? And so
Yeah.
that can be where you see more of the dark, spooky stuff, some of the higher fun, more blissful kind of feelings, and you just have to know that that's all stages of the path. And so it goes both ways. Where I mean, a big part of meditation for me was trying to reduce the ego. Inadvertently, actually, for me, inflated it for a while, because you're like, oh, I know all these spiritual things that other people don't, or it becomes like your sense of pride, where like I'm the most humble person in the room, and it's like spiritual pride kind of creeps in. And so it's like just being knowing that that is part of what we're trying to get rid of and trying to change. Because sometimes when people start to develop, in yoga they call them siddhis or spiritual powers, in they'll say psychic phenomena here more so in the West. So if someone can all of a sudden see energy, or they're clairaudient, they can hear things, or they're more intuitive, then sometimes it's like, well, how do I make money doing this? You
Right.
know? And I don't have any problem with that. But at the same time, I think people become teachers or become sources of inspiration when they're still relatively new to that practice or that path, and will look to someone who's like, I met a psychic, and it's like, well, are they a highly developed psychic? Are they just barely above where you are and looking into the lower realms of things? You know, and we don't have a good way of discerning which is which. And so,
Hmm.
as we start to experience everything, the dark side is that it does open up everything. You open Pandora's box, but as you keep going up, that's when it opens it into like, how can I use like my intuition or my insights in my day-to-day life. And whether you're an acupuncturist, massage therapist, you're a healthcare worker, or I mean, you could be a lawyer. And and how is it that your intuition and heightened sense of like compassion and things like that filters what you do in the world? And so it's always knowing that with every gift, there's a positive and a negative, and that this too shall change is is part of it always. So sometimes you're feeling dark and heavy and things are, you're kind of chewing through a lot of old traumatic things, and then the pendulum kind of swings. You're like, I feel awesome. I feel like I've got all the answers, and I'm really in the flow of everything. And that doesn't last forever either. Sometimes you swing right back to where like, I got to swim out of this stuff. But you'll notice that as your life goes through like trends or these cycles, that you're always moving like on an upward trend, and that eventually the more you're practicing, you know, your meditations, and you're working to become a better person, your upward is a lot faster and the downward is a little bit smaller. So you'll realize that your growth is faster, and what kind of cycles to come back, and your inhibitions become less traumatizing each time that you kind of go through those healing cycles and processes. So
That's exactly how I taught it to my students many years ago. It's funny because it's like it's this loop. We enter these loops, but these loops, it's like, because people tend to feel like, oh, oh, I just got the nudge. So we got to be short here. Sorry, but so there's people tend to feel like, oh, there's an up day, there's a low day, there's a high, there's a low day. It's like, no. When you're on the path, there is an upward trend, and there are these certain loops that we enter. And sometimes I'll get closer. So sometimes there's a lesson in this loop. And if you don't learn the lesson, you re-loop the loop.
mm-hmm.
And then sometimes the loop will get harder or get bigger because you haven't learned it until you
Right.
learn the lesson, and it loops you out of it. And then you go on to the next, and then you go to high, and then you get to this next lesson. So it's just a kind of steady progress. But that's part of the process. And for people to not to get discouraged, their whole point of us being here on this planet is to learn a bunch of lessons and to learn about ourselves and to break these cycles, to break these loops. Otherwise, we are forever living these cycles. And most of the time, we don't even recognize that we're doing them until everything around you kind of turns to shambles or whatever the
Like an
case may
aha
be.
moment in meditation.
Yeah.
Or you have a good spiritual friend that's like, hey.
Yeah, exactly. Like, hey, stop doing that. Right. And that's for me, because I'm very straightforward, and so that I prefer it that way. Like I would just rather people just smack me upside the head and say, "Hey, you're re-looping. Stop re-looping."
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, hurtful but true. Let's go.
Mm-hmm. And you have to also get to a point of self-honesty too, you know, where it's just knowing, again, what am I good at? What am I not so good at? And being okay with not being good at everything, you know, and especially with spiritual practices or things like that, you know, in like classes when people are learning how to scan or feel, they're like, I don't feel anything. I'm like, that's fine. The person that can feel everything, they might not be actually motivated to do anything with it. So as long as you can follow the steps that I'm, you know, teaching, that makes it a lot easier for you. And so sometimes the gifts can be a distraction, you know, but everyone, where you judge yourself and things like that. We're like, well, I'm not seeing anything. I've been meditating for years. I don't, I don't have clairvoyance yet. It's like, who cares? You have all these other things that can happen that are still benefits to you, and things like that. Anytime someone gets too fixated on, they're like, I only want to meditate to have these spiritual gifts or to see things or whatever. I'm like, that's a byproduct of the path. That's not the goal of the path. But sometimes you just got to let people like, okay, keep going for it. And if it doesn't get you anywhere, then we'll see what happens. But
it won't get you anywhere, but that's my answer.
Yeah.
I always tell people, like, because when I first started, when I went public, when I went public with my abilities, and I did lectures and I brought people up and I read people in front of everybody, and these are all like complete strangers, and they asked me, well, how do I get your abilities? How do I attain these healing abilities? It's like, I don't know. You don't. It's a side effect. It's a side effect of how far I've come along my spiritual path. It's a side effect. It's not something you can chase. It's who am I? How am I working myself? And as you work on yourself, then these things, they just start to show up. Because when you begin to reach higher consciousness, you also tap into these higher consciousness, and your body and your intuition. There's just this deeper knowing, and so you just develop that relationship with it over time, through you working on yourself. So, but
And being of service, I think a lot of my teacher always said, you know, he's like, the higher beings aren't going to give you a gift unless you use it. So he's like, if you want to develop clairvoyance, he's like, create a need for it. You know, it's like, so a lot of times I wouldn't see things unless I'm working on like a patient and I'm doing acupuncture, then all of a sudden, then the intuition kicks in, or I'll see something in that moment. But it's not like I can just walk around and just, there's energy beings everywhere and this or that, but it's just like when I need it, it shows up and is given to me. But then when I don't need it, it you know, closes down for me, so I can still engage in a normal world. So it's like for people that want to develop different gifts, it's like, all right, well, create avenues where you do good in the world that those gifts would need to show up to help you, and that's I think one of the safest ways to develop those.
And if you want to develop an ability, you're going to be used, meaning that the divine's gonna say, hey, you wanted this, we're going to do this to you, and you need to do this thing. It's like a contract. We're going to put you to work. That's exactly it. And that's what I'm doing. I'm being put to work. So it's just but that's it. So hey, I love this conversation, man. We can talk for hours. I know we can.
Yeah, no, I look forward to it.
I gotta.
You and I get circles, and we chat forever. So
yeah. So first of all, thanks for doing this again. We're definitely going to do this again. I enjoyed it, and these are some awesome topics. So thank you, Jason.
Yeah, namaste, brother. Take care.
Yeah, you too.